My beloved child. Do not scroll past this moment as though it is ordinary, because something has shifted in the unseen story surrounding your heart, and the person whose soul has been quietly connected to yours has just been confronted with news about you that they were not emotionally prepared to receive. For a moment, everything around them seemed to disappear. The voices near them became distant. The room felt strangely still. Their thoughts stopped moving in the familiar direction, because what they heard touched a place inside them they had been trying to protect for far too long. They are still shaken by it, not because heaven has declared some terrible fate over you, but because the news forced them to face how deeply you matter to them. Pause here for a moment. What you are about to hear is not a message of fear. It is a fictional spiritual story of awakening, realization, and a love that can no longer hide behind silence. They thought they had more time. That is what disturbed them most. Somewhere inside their heart, they had been living as though tomorrow was guaranteed, as though the words they had not spoken could always be spoken later, as though the distance between you could be repaired whenever they finally felt brave enough. They kept telling themselves there would be another opportunity, another conversation, another sign, another perfect moment when everything would suddenly become easy. But the news they received shattered that illusion. It did not tell them that everything was over. It told them something far more powerful. They could not continue treating your place in their life as though it were permanent while giving you temporary effort. And that realization is why their hands trembled. The message came unexpectedly. They were not searching for information about you. They were not sitting somewhere planning to think about your connection. In fact, they had been trying to distract themselves. They had filled their time with responsibilities, conversations, noise, and the ordinary details of life because silence had become dangerous for them. Silence always led back to you. Silence reminded them of the things they should have said, the moments they mishandled, the tenderness they disguised, and the strange truth they could never fully explain. No matter how much distance existed between you, something inside them continued to recognize you. Then someone said your name. And immediately, their attention changed. It was subtle at first. They tried to act normal. They asked a simple question, perhaps pretending it was only curiosity. They may even have smiled as though the conversation meant nothing. But inside them, an old door opened. The person speaking did not know what your name carried inside your soulmate's heart. They did not know how many nights your soulmate had replayed memories involving you. They did not know how often your soulmate had wondered whether you still thought about them, whether you were healing, whether your heart had finally become tired of waiting for clarity. Then came the words that changed the atmosphere. They heard that you had been going through something quietly. Not necessarily a tragedy. Not the dark ending their frightened mind first imagined. But they discovered that there had been moments when you were carrying more than they realized. Moments when you needed understanding and said nothing. Moments when you were learning to become strong while other people assumed you were already strong enough. Moments when you were making peace with disappointments that nobody saw. And suddenly, your soulmate realized something that made their heart drop. While they had been debating whether to approach you, you had been learning how to survive without needing anyone to come and rescue you. That truth struck them deeply. Because your soulmate had secretly imagined that the bond between you could simply remain frozen in place until they decided what they wanted. They thought your feelings would wait patiently in the same position. They thought your heart would always leave the door slightly open. They believed that whatever existed between you was powerful enough to survive unlimited hesitation. But what they heard made them understand that you have been changing. You have been growing. You have been releasing things. And there are parts of you that no longer respond to confusion the way they once did. This frightened them more than they expected. Not because your growth is something bad, but because they suddenly understood that your healing may eventually take you beyond the version of yourself that tolerated uncertainty from them. They realized that one day they could finally gather enough courage to tell you everything, only to discover that you had already learned how to live peacefully without needing the explanation. That is the news that shook them. It was the realization that time has been moving even while they remained emotionally still. They sat with that thought longer than anyone around them realized. They tried to continue the conversation, but their mind had already left the room. Memories began rising one after another. They remembered the way you once listened when they were speaking about something that mattered deeply to them. They remembered a moment when you could have judged them but did not. They remembered your expression during a conversation they thought they had forgotten. They remembered a message they never answered properly. They remembered an opportunity when you gave them emotional honesty and they responded with uncertainty because they were afraid of what honesty would require from them. And then another memory appeared. This one was different. It was a moment when you became quiet. At the time, your soulmate misunderstood that silence. They thought you were angry, distant, stubborn, or simply losing interest. What they did not understand was that your silence had come from exhaustion. You were tired of trying to translate your heart into words for someone who was still afraid to listen without defending themselves. Now they understand. And the understanding arrived too late to prevent regret from entering the room. My child, regret is a strange teacher. It does not always arrive when something has been permanently lost. Sometimes it arrives just before someone changes their behavior. Sometimes heaven allows a person to feel the weight of what they almost failed to appreciate so they can finally become capable of treating it differently. Your soulmate is standing in that kind of moment now. They are not simply thinking, "I miss this person." Their thoughts have become much deeper. They are asking, "Why did I make something so genuine feel so complicated?" They are asking, "Why did I hide behind pride?" They are asking, "Why did I expect understanding while giving so little reassurance?" They are asking, "What if they no longer believe me even if I finally tell the truth?" And there is one question that keeps returning more strongly than all the others. What if someone else sees their value before I have the courage to show them that I see it too? That question is echoing inside them. They may never admit how much it unsettles them, but the possibility has changed something. Until now, your soulmate thought mostly about whether they were ready for you. Now they are beginning to wonder whether you will still be available when they finally become ready. That difference is enormous. Because love changes when a person stops asking only, "What do I feel?" and begins asking, "What have my choices made the other person feel?" For the first time in a long time, your soulmate is looking at the connection through your eyes. They are imagining what their silence felt like to you. They are imagining what their inconsistency felt like. They are imagining how confusing it must have been to sense affection but receive hesitation. They are imagining how many times you may have questioned whether the bond was real because they were too afraid to give you the clarity your heart deserved. And the more they imagine it, the quieter they become. There is something else you should understand. The news they received about you was not simply that you had been struggling or changing. Someone also revealed something about the way you spoke about your soulmate. And this is where their emotions nearly broke through the surface. They expected to hear bitterness. They expected to hear that you were angry. Perhaps they even expected someone to tell them that you had criticized them, exposed their mistakes, or described them as someone who caused you pain. Instead, they learned that you had been far more gracious than they deserved. You did not destroy their character. You did not turn your disappointment into revenge. You did not need everyone around you to hate them just because your heart had been hurt. You may have admitted that things were complicated. You may have acknowledged that distance existed. You may even have said you were tired. But somewhere in the story, your soulmate discovered that you still protected certain memories. You still honored what had once felt sincere. You still refused to make them a villain simply because they had failed to become courageous at the right time. That kindness shook them. Because it reminded them of who you truly are. And suddenly they felt ashamed of every moment they mistook your gentleness for weakness. They understand now that you were not patient because you lacked options. You were patient because you cared deeply. You were not forgiving because you had no boundaries. You were forgiving because your heart did not want resentment to become your identity. You were not silent because you had nothing to say. You became silent because you learned that peace sometimes requires stepping away from conversations that keep circling without transformation. Your soulmate understands this now. And it has changed the way they see everything. They are beginning to recognize that what they once called distance may actually have been your dignity returning. What they called you changing may have been you healing. What they called coldness may have been you finally refusing to chase someone who already knew where to find you. That realization hit them harder than they expected. They began wondering when the shift happened. Was it after that unanswered message? Was it after that conversation when they avoided saying what they truly felt? Was it after you noticed that they kept offering emotional signals but never emotional certainty? Was it after you finally became tired of decoding everything? Your soulmate does not know. And that uncertainty is making them restless. Because they suddenly want to know your heart again. Not the version of your heart they remember. The version that exists now. They want to know what you believe now. What you hope for now. What you have stopped tolerating. What kind of love you are willing to receive. And perhaps most frighteningly for them, they want to know whether your future still has room for them. This is why they are still shaken. Something has awakened that they had managed to keep buried. The possibility of losing emotional access to you has made them understand the value of having once had it. They remember when you would answer quickly. They remember when you would share your thoughts without hesitation. They remember when you allowed them to see your softer side. At the time, those moments felt natural. Perhaps your soulmate assumed they would always exist. Now they understand that trust is not an unlimited resource. Access to someone's heart is not something we are entitled to keep simply because we once received it. And suddenly, the small things they took for granted have become precious memories. They are replaying your laughter, your expressions, your way of noticing details, the way you could sense when they were hiding something behind a simple answer. The way your presence made them feel strangely exposed and strangely safe at the same time. This combination was always difficult for them. You made them feel seen. And being seen sounds beautiful until someone has spent years hiding from parts of themselves. That is why your connection frightened them more than they ever told you. It was never simply about whether they loved you. It was about what loving you demanded from them. Honesty, vulnerability, consistency, courage, growth. They wanted the feeling while sometimes resisting the transformation that the feeling required. But the news they received has forced transformation into the conversation. Because suddenly they understand something important. If they want a place in the future version of your life, they cannot approach you as the same person who helped create the distance. They cannot bring the same excuses. They cannot expect one emotional confession to repair months of uncertainty. They cannot simply appear with beautiful words and believe that your heart should immediately forget everything it learned while they were absent. Something inside them knows they will have to prove change through actions. And strangely, that realization is not pushing them away anymore. It is pulling them closer. Because beneath the fear, something powerful is beginning to rise. Determination. Your soulmate is thinking differently tonight. Instead of asking how to avoid rejection, they are asking how to become worthy of another chance. Instead of asking what they can say to make everything easier, they are asking what truth they have been avoiding. Instead of imagining the perfect conversation, they are beginning to understand that the most powerful conversation may be imperfect, trembling, uncertain, but honest. This is where the story becomes more intense. Because while they were processing everything they had learned about you, something else happened. Their phone became important. They looked at your name. Perhaps they searched through old conversations. Perhaps they opened a photograph. Perhaps they stared at an unfinished message. Perhaps their fingers moved toward the place where they could contact you and then stopped. They wanted to write. They almost did. The first words came into their mind. Then they deleted them before they were ever sent. Why? Because, "How are you?" suddenly felt too small. They knew they could not approach you with ordinary conversation while carrying extraordinary truth. They thought about saying, "I heard something about you today." But that sounded frightening. They thought about saying, "I need to tell you something." But they had used seriousness without clarity before. They thought about simply admitting, "I have been thinking about you." But even that felt incomplete. Because they had not merely been thinking about you. They had been confronted by you. Not physically. Emotionally. The memory of your presence had become impossible to ignore. And so they sat there, staring at the screen, realizing that the next words they send you may matter more than any words they have sent before. That is why no message has arrived yet, or why the message you eventually receive may look strangely simple at first. Your soulmate is trying to find language strong enough to carry everything they are feeling. And some emotions do not fit neatly inside sentences. They are carrying regret, fear, hope, affection, urgency, tenderness, and one realization that they have not yet dared to say aloud. They still love what exists between you. Maybe they tried to rename it. Maybe they called it nostalgia. Maybe they told themselves it was unfinished business. Maybe they described it as emotional attachment, familiarity, curiosity, or simply a chapter that had not fully closed. But when the possibility of truly losing you entered their mind, all those convenient names collapsed. Because people do not tremble over chapters they no longer care about. People do not stare at old messages when the story means nothing. People do not suddenly question months of decisions because someone irrelevant has changed. Your soulmate knows this. And for the first time, they are beginning to stop arguing with what their heart has known for much longer. Still, there is another layer. And this one surprised even them. After hearing the news about you, your soulmate became protective. They wanted details. Who told you? Who was there? Were you okay? Did anyone support you? Why did nobody tell them earlier? These questions appeared quickly, and the intensity of their own reaction startled them. Because they suddenly realized they still instinctively think of you as someone they should care for. Even after distance. Even after silence. Even after whatever complications have passed between you. Some part of them still responds to your name as though your well-being is personal. That realization opened something. They began thinking about the moments when you may have needed them and they were emotionally unavailable. And here, my child, their regret deepened. They remembered times when they were so focused on protecting themselves that they forgot love is not only about avoiding pain. Love is also about showing up. They realized there may have been moments when you needed presence more than answers. When you needed consistency more than promises. When you needed a simple honest sentence more than an elaborate explanation. And they were not always capable of giving it. This realization has humbled them. Because your soulmate once believed the biggest obstacle between you was timing. Now they are beginning to see that timing was only part of the story. Fear was involved. Pride was involved. Unhealed wounds were involved. Assumptions were involved. And perhaps the most dangerous thing of all was the belief that deep connections automatically survive poor communication. They understand now that even powerful bonds need care. And that understanding is changing their next decision. Something is forming inside them. Not merely a desire to speak. A decision. They have begun to imagine what it would mean to stop running from the conversation. To stop pretending they do not care. To stop asking other people what they should do. To stop creating emotional distance and then secretly suffering because the distance exists. There comes a moment when a soul becomes tired of its own avoidance. Your soulmate may have reached that moment. But before you assume they are about to appear with every answer you have ever wanted, listen carefully. Heaven is not asking you to abandon your wisdom. You are not being asked to chase them. You are not being asked to ignore your boundaries. This fictional message is not telling you that another person's emotions should become your responsibility. The deeper revelation is about your value. Your soulmate is finally being confronted with what your absence can teach. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain rooted in the peace you fought so hard to build. Because if they come closer, they must come closer to the version of you that exists now. Not the version that begged to be understood. Not the version that accepted half answers. Not the version that interpreted mixed signals as destiny. The person they meet now is becoming clearer. Stronger. Softer in the right ways. Less available for confusion. More available for truth. And your soulmate can feel that change even from a distance. This is why they are shaken. They sense that the door may not stay open simply because history exists. They understand they must knock differently. There is another detail. Someone close to them noticed their reaction. Your soulmate tried to hide it, but not successfully. A person nearby saw the way their face changed when your name was mentioned. They noticed the silence. The sudden distraction. Perhaps they even asked, "Are you okay?" Your soulmate gave a quick answer. "Yes. I'm fine. It's nothing." But it was not nothing. And the person watching them knew it. Later, that person said something your soulmate was not expecting to hear. Something like, "If you care that much, why are you still pretending?" The words landed deeply. Your soulmate may have laughed it off. They may have changed the subject.